My name is Jason S.C. Fung, the host of Vanilla Club podcast. Today's guest is Allan Wexler. Allan is an artist who's worked predominantly in the fields of architecture and design for many decades. Allan is also one of the masterminds behind the viral Farm is Table dinner party concept. A really cool concept if you ask me. If you're on the same side of social media as us, you've likely seen photos of the event or one of its inspired successors, of which there have been quite a few now. If you haven't seen Farmer's Table, hit pause and go check it out. Farmer's Table is a joint project between Allan and his project partner, the architect Michael Urinsky of Tangible Space. The concept was to challenge the perception of what a farm-to-table meal is by creating a dinner table in situ, built right into the farm itself, dug essentially right into the soil, with weeds and wildflowers as the table centerpiece. This is one of many projects that make up Allan and Michael's direct response to the 1932 Futurist cookbook by F.T. Marinetti, what they call a new Futurist cookbook. A new Futurist cookbook seeks to harness the provocative, innovative energy of historical futurism, a very popular avant-garde pre-war art genre. He also works to redirect these methods towards a rethinking, a revaluation of our relationship with food. So we ask Allan, why has Farm to Table gone viral? And what is it that young people are resonating with in his work? And here's a hint. It has a lot to do with simplicity. It's too bad that due to my lack of technical ability, we lost a first minute or two of Allan's audio and video. Nonetheless, the backup mic was able to catch Allan speaking. So forgive us for any of the technical snafus. Let's jump right into it. We hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to Vanilla Club podcast, where we are lay people engaging with complexity in the world, connecting with sundry individuals doing cool things around the world who are happy to talk to us about how their craft somehow engages with complexity and how we as total non-specialists can somehow interact and try to learn about it and apply it to our lives. So today we've got a fantastic guest, someone that I'm so excited to interview and exchange with, Allan Wexler, designer, artist, practitioner, teacher, and you're someone that is in this space where there's something culinary, there's something design-oriented, architecture, the sort of environmental determinism. I'm sure there's a lot of concepts that you can help walk us through. Maybe we can just start out with the entry point to some of your work, and we can talk a little bit about Farmer's Table. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the project, how you entered into it, what some of your goals were with this project.
Great. Yeah, well, my background is I studied architecture and I practice as a fine artist. So my work is really informed by my education as an architect, and most of my teaching career was teaching architecture. More recently, I'm teaching now at Pratt Institute for the past 3 years, but before that I was teaching at Parsons School of Design, and then before that, Pratt in School of Architecture. But nowadays, I've been teaching an elective, one elective in the fall semester, which is called Absurd Thinking Between Art and Design. And it's a cross-disciplinary elective. I have students in architecture, interior design, and industrial design. And we look at the world from the vantage point of what it's like to investigate the way an artist investigates phenomenon in the world around them. In the spring semester, I'm teaching a course called Food Space, where we are actually looking at the way in which our utensils, furniture, small dining pavilions, and spaces can enhance a dining experience.
And pushing boundaries between what is culinary art, what's fine art, and what are the applied arts, and how all of those things integrate into one seamless action. So I think Farm is Table came out of that investigation as well. So
from what I understand, this is just to help set the scene for maybe some listeners who aren't familiar with the location, because I do think location is the setting is important. Recently in Sydney, they did a Jaws retrospective. Again, I'm thinking Peconic is sort of, it's right near Montauk, right? It's almost
Peconic
that
Bay. Yeah.
Peconic Bay. Yeah. So is it Treber Farms?
That's correct.
Okay. So Treber Farms is basically in the Peconic Bay. It's in a setting that is almost akin to some of those scenes in Jaws. It's Atlantic, seaside, some beautiful light that you can get there.
Oh yes.
Beautiful, beautiful.
There's a little difference because we're not on the ocean side. We're at the end of Long Island, which is about 2 hours from New York City. So we have a home in New York City as well, in Brooklyn, but we also have most of our time is spent in a studio on the North Fork of Long Island. A lot of your listeners might be familiar with the South Fork, which is which backs up to the Atlantic Ocean and the Peconic Bay. And then the Peconic Bay then goes to the North Fork, which is where we are, and to Long Island Sound, which faces Connecticut. So we're on the end of the island, and it's a fork. The South Fork is more recognizable by especially art historians because that's the kind of home of a lot of the abstract expressionist painters who discovered the South Fork as more reasonable real estate for them to be able to practice their experimental art, like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning and Lee Krasner. But the North Fork has become a destination for younger artists nowadays. But it began to be an area of wineries. So I know the idea of farming is important to your podcast, I think. So farming, the North Fork had been discovered by people to be very excellent soil and climate for grapes. So it's become a big wine region on Long Island. So we're surrounded by a lot of vineyards, and because of the climate and soil. But Peter Treber is a friend. He's also a fellow artist. And he has a farm, I think it's at least 50 acres. And each year he has a barn and he invites local artists to enter, to submit work for a project that he calls Art Basil, the herb basil, as a joke, because there's a famous, Art Basel, which is in Miami and I guess Switzerland as well, is a very important art fair. So he's spoofing the idea of Art Basel and making it Art Basil. So my partner and I, Michael Urinsky, who I should give a lot of credit to for working with me on this project, we've been working for the past year and a half on various experimental dinners, which we're calling Futurist dinners. We came up with this idea for Art Basel to do an excavation into the earth and kind of riff on the idea of farm is table. We said farm to table. So we called our farm is table, where the earth is the tabletop. And so that's a little backstory about the farm is table. And it's a very simple idea that when we came up with this idea during the summer, toward the end of the summer, I realized I had made a drawing in 1980s, which was a cross section through the earth where the bench and the people sat in the earth, where the tabletop was the earth. So it kind of comes full circle, in terms of the drawing I had originally done. And then for this project, I did more elaborate drawings, and we cut a trench into the earth that's 30 inches from the top of the ground, with a bench that's a 12-inch deep bench that people can sit on, this kind of continuous bench, which is a trough cut into the earth between two rows of apple trees. So it's a very beautiful setting, because Peter also has an orchard on his farm, apple trees. And so this was cut, and it was 30 feet long. We had, I think it was 30 participants who, and we had a very good chef from Brooklyn, Caroline Hahn, who is a chef at a restaurant in Brooklyn called Diondi, and she's an excellent chef. And all of the food was sourced locally, most of it from Peter's farm, and the fish from the local market, fish market. And it was all cooked on site and then delivered to this table with these 30 people. And it was a beautiful evening. I was very worried that it would rain, and we had no rain date in mind, because the chef had to get back to the city to, for her restaurant. And it was a beautiful night. I drilled holes in the earth and had a row of candles that we lit, luckily, because as the sun went down, and it was a beautifully warm evening, the sun went down, the moon came up, and it was magic, pure magic. That's why the photographs are so beautiful, because the sunlight comes down and the moonlight comes up, and then we have candlelight, and really a luxurious meal where people were sitting in the earth, literally in the ground, in the mud, and they were very well dressed. A lot of the people came just for this event from the city, and we kind of warned them they'll be sitting in the ground, wear appropriate clothing, but they were very fashionable young people who came to this event, and it was a magical evening.
It's, again, looking from the photos, there's a confluence of so many different things that, again, happen in subtlety. But to my eye, it's one thing to have the food. It's one thing to have a beautiful setting. It's a whole other thing to have great company. And at the same time, some type of, again, when you have people like yourself and Mr. Urinsky who are thinking through all of these elements and trying to lay them out in a way that there's a sequence, and we're questioning a few things, right? We're questioning this idea of screen time and the loneliness that so many city dwellers face. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about some of the themes that were, underpin this concept.
I think the whole premise of these series of dinner parties is, I had started this a little backstory about the Futurist cookbook. For some of your listeners who might not be aware of the movement in the art world that came shortly after World War I, called Futurism, which was an attempt to undermine the status quo of Italians. And they were being, they were young, they were fascist, politically, I don't have a lot in common with them, but they had such innovation and such a sense of humor. And they were out to undermine the idea that pasta makes people lethargic. And it was an attempt to undermine the culinary arts and conflate it with fine arts. And so they created these absurdist dinners. But, they never really, I think they may have staged a few of them. So this was Marinetti, who was the big spearheader of the Futurist movement. He was a poet, Futurist poet. He, in 1932, which comes after, because the Futurists were in the teens, and 1932, he published this book called the Futurist Cookbook. And I thought, if we subtract 1932 from 2025, how many years later it's up time for an update. And my entire career, because I studied architecture and I was very interested in the basic human instincts to survive, which is eating, sleeping, and bathing. And so much of my career has experimented with those issues in an experimental way, that food was a major where eating was a major topic in my work in the past, where I had made various installations and sculptures and drawings about that topic. And so I started working on this idea of updating the Futurist cookbook, and I did a lot of work to lay out some of the earlier projects I had done. And then Michael Urinsky, who's an amazing designer who runs an office called Office of Tangible Space, and he's very cross-disciplinary in terms of architecture, interior design, product design, furniture. He is very knowledgeable and connected to the culinary arts because he does a lot of restaurants. And I said, Michael, you need to take, because this sat in my studio, this idea for this book and the mock-up in InDesign, which is a program that graphic designers use. I learned how to lay out the whole book, portions of it. And then it sat in my studio for 2 years. And then Michael, who's a friend, came over to my studio, and I said, Michael, you need to take this over because I'm too old to do it. And together we've been doing these series of projects. We're up to 6 dinners that we've done. We want to do 10, and we have some publishers. Hopefully, we have some publishers that are interested in publishing the book, and the book will include earlier work of mine that has to do with food. But the title is called Working Titles for a New Futurist Cookbook. And so one of the earliest pieces I ever did, and let me know if I'm going on too much. And
no, not at all.
Interrupt me. But one of the earliest pieces I did, which has gotten a lot of press and has traveled around the world, is a project called Coffee Seeks Its Own Level. And I was being tongue-in-cheek, but I was very serious about it. And I was very interested in the Japanese tea ceremony at that time and traditional Japanese architecture. I was very inspired by Zen Buddhism and tea ceremony, but I couldn't very well appropriate tea ceremony for my own, sculptural, artistic work. But coffee was okay. So I started experimenting with deconstructing coffee pots that had to be reassembled as a kit of parts to slow the process of making coffee in the morning, because you'd have to assemble the coffee pot before you can make your coffee. But this one project called Coffee Seeks Its Own Level are 4 ceramic coffee cups connected together with vinyl tubing, like surgical tubing. And if one of the 4 people lifts the cup before the others, the coffee overflows the 3 other cups. So it's a matter of equality and democracy and creating a level playing field and raising the 4 cups simultaneously in order to drink coffee, which, has to do with the kind of idea of the host and the guest in a Japanese tea ceremony, or who drinks or acknowledges drinking the beverage first, and then the ceremonial qualities of that. So that project really spearheaded a lot of other investigations in kind of food-related projects in terms of, utensils, furniture, and small buildings that I would design and build as a cross between art and design, that kind of thing. So that's how it all started, with this idea of this new Futures cookbook. And now we're staging, we've staged, this will be we're moving on to the next event, which will be the 6th in the series of 10 Futurist dinner parties. The Farmer's Table was number 5.
I definitely want to get into each of them. Again, Tea with Strangers.
Oh yeah.
Dinner at the Light Table. I want to dig into each of them.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Before we do that, let's just expound a little bit on the futurism, because again, you've given us a glimpse of a lot of knowledge and insight there. Let's talk a little bit more about the futurist. Again, the cookbook, having looked through it myself, again, it's absurdist, right? It's
totally. Yeah.
There's divorced eggs, sculpted meat. There's
you've done your homework.
And there's my favorite one was the Devil in Black Key. You've got orange juice, grappa, liquid chocolate, and then a hard-boiled egg yolk, which sounds kind of appetizing, but in practice, I'm not so sure what sort of viscosity you'd get.
Yeah, some of the dinners were not edible.
Right. Well, the perfume I think was right, because they played with, in some senses, they were hyper synthetic, right? They were forecasting some of this idea of, Soylent Green almost, right? Where you've got, synthetic fats and pills and vitamins that, food coming in these different, almost pharmaceutical forms. So tell us a little bit more about, this riff, this sort of centuries riff update to this book. Give us a little bit more background as to where you're drawing the inspiration from.
Well, a lot of it has to do with my existing work that, over all the years of collecting and making projects about the culinary arts and the integration of culinary arts with kind of space, utensils, and environments. I think it started with that, but then I, in teaching for so many years and teaching architecture and design all these years and sometimes fine art, it was always so much fun to read to my students some of the Futurist manifesti, which is like a Futurist manifesto on clothing, on sculpture, on painting, on architecture, and on food. So I just really enjoyed that. And I always reminded myself that even the architect Le Corbusier wrote a book called Tour de New Architecture, and it sounds like a Futurist manifesto. There was no architecture since the Parthenon, and it's very dictatorial. A house is a machine for living, and it's like, it's very religious almost. And I kind of enjoyed that kind of humor, and that would often be brought to my students. So I think it started with that kind of discovery of the Futurists. And I know it's a contentious topic because of their, they were young and they thought highly of war and noise and the military and I always like to describe Futurism as the kind of the equivalent of Impressionism, but it's the Impressionists' understanding of urbanism. So, Giacomo Balla did paintings of street, the glare coming off of a street light, the kind of, rather than the modeled light coming through leaf patterns or flowers of the typical Impressionists. The Futurists were more about urbanism and noise, speed, and that kind of thing. So I just found it invigorating and interesting, especially within the context of the seriousness of the design arts. The design arts, I think, need a little bit of a kind of shaking up.
For sure. So when we think of the Impressionism versus that urbanism, so someone like Haussmann, right, in Paris, right, that would have been an example. That's a classic sort of Impressionist planner, right? Right. And the funny thing is that, again, these things, don't they come in cycles, in the sense that, when Americans go to Capri or they go to Venice or something like that, they take all these photos and, it's so nice. And to people who are maybe a little bit more inclined to some of these things, I mean, they're like, yeah, it's because it's human scale. Not a lot of the American transport experience is not really at that scale, right? And in a sense, the Futurists were playing with that 100 years ago, right? There's themes of scale, right? And I think if we think about Farm as Table, that to me is a very powerful element, is scale, right? In the sense that on one hand, we feel big. We're here at the table and there's only 20 of us and we're sort of, King Arthur's table and we're here. But at the same time, we're almost shrunken down to sort of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids level, where we're maybe our feet touch the soil and we can imagine some of the invertebrates and we can imagine some of the smaller species that we don't ever encounter. But maybe this table has caused people to think a little bit farther down the scale in terms of existence.
Yeah, and also this, when you're up against the earth, you're smelling the earth, and And the table, the table setting and the decorations were the weeds and the wildflowers coming up between the rows of apple trees. So it was very magical in that way. But it does, brings you down from the level of all the super technology and social media, and you're down in the dirt with your fellow participants eating in the dirt, and it's like being a child again and playing in the mud, and it was that kind of thing. So I think it's an act of humility to rather than sitting uplifted and raised up and on this kind of horizontal surface that's above the earth, floating planes above the earth, which I've done many projects about. The tabletop as a floating surface, kind of an anti-gravity machine. And how could we I've done projects about floating tabletops and things like that hover between earth and sky, heaven and earth. So the table features very prominently in the history of art and culture, for sure. And when you see this row of people sitting in the ground, it was pretty cool, pretty interesting.
For sure, and I think that it's timeless, right? I mean, it's one of those classic themes, the table, and at the same time, it's also quite timely too. I think from a travel tourism point of view, this is something that people upgrade to. The chef's table, the behind the scenes. The Japanese introduced this to the world sitting at the sushi table. And I think in like Dubai or somewhere, where you have they've got these glass tables that, sometimes you'll see them on a crane, and it's this very elitist thing, this sky table type of thing.
I don't know that.
Yeah. I'll send you a link. I mean, there's a few in China I've seen where, China has a few. There are these, they've gone crazy in terms of virality. But the coffee shop in the you almost have to mountain climb to the coffee shop, and they have a little glass kind of banquette that you climb into, and then they serve you a coffee. I mean, it's if you have any fear of heights, it's probably not the best thing for you. But I thought that Farmer's Table is such a contrast to all of that stuff, which is trying to elevate you. It's this sort of artificial scarcity, supremacy type thing, whereas you've taken it and you've literally brought it back to the earth.
Yeah. Our first Futurist dinner, we decided we would do something that was, where the table already existed. And my wife, who's here, Allan Wexler, and I built a project for the public artwork for the Hudson River Park in Manhattan, New York City, where we built this large table called two large tables. There's a table that's held up by 13 chairs, and then there's a shade pavilion held up by 13 chairs, a horizontal plane at table height, and one at roof height held up by each 13 chairs. And because the table is too large, we had to cut slots into the table so people can sit merging themselves within the body of the table, and the furniture is holding up the chairs. So when people come from different parts of New York City and sit at this table, they're entering into the table from a different from a different from north side versus the south side, and they converge and they're sitting in a slot in the table facing each other. So they have to join a conversation. So there is a lot about community in both Farmer's Table and the two large tables, where we staged our first dinner party called Tea with Strangers, where we just had group of chefs create this amazing pile of food on this table, and just passersby could sit down and enjoy a meal together with strangers. So that was our first experience in terms of doing these, because that already existed and we didn't have to build anything. So it already existed. We thought, well, let's try something, just start that way by doing something that already existed in the world. And that was a project we had done about 18 or 19 years ago for the Hudson River Park in New York City.
Thinking that quote, it's the Joseph Brodsky quote, that aesthetics is the mother of ethics. I love that quote, and I think it's highly relevant to these pieces, these installations, your work, in the sense that you are rejigging people's expectations and forcing them, well, not force is maybe not the right word, but inviting them to reconsider some of these things they've just taken totally for granted, right? That exactly. I should go sit down at a table and be served and eat to my heart's content. And then if I decide that you've rendered sufficient service, I'll tip you, and then you'll open the door for me, and then I'll get in a cab and I'll go. You've totally upended this and forced people to reconsider, okay, what do I value? What do I value? Right? And aesthetically, I mean, that's it. It's saying, okay, so then I sit down at the, like, should we talk about the distant family dinner? Yeah. Or okay, let's talk about that one, and just thinking about that, because again, that one jumps out at me because, having a Chinese background, using chopsticks, it's a different aesthetic experience. It's a different set of rules to fork and knife. I was so familiar to me when you talked about that, because then, okay, once you have the chopsticks and you serve it Lazy Susan style, we're all grabbing from the same thing, which changes the dynamic, right? So I'm like partners with the next person.
Such a simple transformation from a fork to a chopstick. There's a wonderful essay by Roland Barthes called, from his book Empire of Signs, and he has an essay that talks about the difference between the chopsticks and the fork. The chopstick probes and dissects, like, whereas the fork stabs. It's like, so one is so aggressive, one is very delicate. To use chopsticks, you have to understand how fish flakes off the meat, flakes off the flakes away from it, and you discover it, and it slows you down, and it makes you more thought. You think about what is around you that is considered insignificant, but that becomes theater. And I think a lot of my work has to do with taking the most uninteresting, ordinary, undervalued, underlooked situations or phenomenon in our world and just pointing attention to them. But I think that's the definition of what it is to be an artist, whether you're Marcel Duchamp and you're pointing attention to the beauty of a plumbing fixture called a urinal and you're upending it by inverting it. Now, I would take the Duchamp urinal, invert it, but then I would return it back to function in that position, so I have to replumb it, that kind of thing, so I've always gone that extra step to because of my background in the design arts, I return it back to function. So I intentionally destroy something functional like coffee cups by putting holes in it, and then I have to recreate it so that it doesn't leak and it causes you to lift the cup simultaneously. So that idea of what you brought up, the chopsticks, I love that essay by Roland Barthes. I read it to my students, especially in food space class. Also, a very important influence on my whole background was the Book of Tea, which you might be familiar with. It was a wonderful little tiny book. Anyway, that kind of things had become very important to me when I first discovered them, but I didn't want to appropriate a kind of Japanese aesthetic. So I kind of figure out, well, what does it mean for a Western individual to rethink the world around us? I wanted to be able to make those insignificant things in our own life very significant, so that kind of, really pushing the notion of less is more, the kind of Mies van der Rohe statement, less is more. It's like, how could you point attention to those insignificant little things, draw attention to them through your work? And so same thing with a lot of these dinners. We're doing the next futurist dinner we're doing is a called a percussion. It's a percussive dinner party where sound is important. I think it was Arnold Schoenberg who once said that he was interested in how composing a piece of music that would sound good in a restaurant or a dinner party. I might be inventing this. I'm not an art historian by a long shot, so I have to warn you. So it might be that I just invented this idea that could you have the clanking of knives, forks, and spoons and dinnerware that become musical, that become a musical composition. So taking that idea, I built a table that has conical forms that project off of a hollow table. So it's very light, very hollow, and almost taking the table and turning it into like a violin or a guitar with cones that come off of it that have speakers and electronics and plug-in jacks. And we have a percussionist, Matt Evans, who will be composing a percussive dinner party for two people eating at this table and then the server. So he's still in process. I sent over my table to Michael's studio in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, I mean, and he's been rehearsing and testing it. And so I think we're going to be staging that sometime in February. So these things are a long way away, but I'm excited about that dinner, the table, because I wanted to make the table look like sound. So I have these funky cones coming off out of the leg of a table, out of the edge of the table, out of the center of the table, and they're conical forms, almost like a Thomas Edison Victrola. If you're, I don't know if you remember those. Even I'm too young for that. But I wanted to be able to visualize sound. And so we're going to put surface microphones on like the dinnerware and things like that, so that when you drink soup or you hit the glass, it will reverberate in this wherever the venue will be.
That's so cool. If anything, if you do anything, just inviting people to slow down. Yeah. Literally, if that's all you did, that would already be a huge contribution, because we're fighting this campaign, parents who are concerned about fast food and just the fast foodification of so many things that kids are doing now.
Everything in our lives.
Right? Everything in our lives. Just that very one thing. Like, even if you have to use some type of entertainment medium, right? Like, oh, wow, this is some oral sonic thing. Just the very fact that someone might have to slow down to consume the food and be in the moment, that's, I think, already a huge contribution.
Yeah, we're really taking the slow food movement to an extreme, making it visual, not just edible.
Dinner at the light table.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about that one, but that one there's something very singular about that, in that there's color, there is light, there's it's obviously very theatrical, but you're talking about illuminated cutlery, illuminated servery that is then presented, and then I guess the consumer of the food becomes sort of the maestro.
Yeah, the light table came about. I built this in my studio. I found clear dinnerware at the local dump. There's a recycling center at the local, recycling center on the North Fork here, and I collected all this glass dinnerware, and I embedded it into the surface of the table. So, and then I have light sources below the tabletop underneath with electrical cords coming off of the table. So it's very visual. You see like 10 black cords going to electrical outlets in the space traveling. And then the light emanates from the surface of the table. All the dinnerware is flush with the tabletop. And so the light, well, not all of it, the wine glass is embedded in the tabletop. But so imagine, for instance, even you have a glass of red wine, but as soon as you have light transmitted through the red wine, the color is so exquisite. You know, we all hold up the wine because color is so important in wine tasting as well, and the viscosity of it. But when the light is actually transmitting through the glassware and you're sitting in a dark space, or you have clear, the chef was a Vietnamese chef, and a lot of all these broths with floating clear noodles and vegetables floating in these broths that where the light came through these beautiful colors. It was like an exquisite light show. And yet it was also incredibly tasty. So, you know, part of the Futurist is the food wasn't necessarily edible, but we're trying to make these dinners so that they are edible. And that was one where it was just myself eating the food. So I'm not a performer, but I was asked to sit because I had an exhibition. I have a gallery in the Tribeca region of Manhattan, Jane Lombard Gallery. And I had a one-person exhibition in January, February, and March. And during the run of the exhibition, the light table was in the exhibition as a sculpture. But then we activated the light table during the run of the exhibition and had this performance as well. So that was really a beautifully staged event. And it was just beautiful to see the colors coming through this various food. Light passing through food. It's like, you know, when you cut like a cucumber cross section and you see the translucency of the vegetable, it's beautiful. But people, as you said, don't take the time to look and observe or to smell or to taste even. It's just, you know, that. So I think it's about making food not just taste, but also smell, sight, sound. So we bring into some of these experiences and it becomes a multi-sensual activation rather than just purely an edible one. So it's all part of it.
That reminds me of an interview that Karl Lagerfeld did with, I think it was Charlie Rose. This was around the time that he had that sort of big physical transformation, right? And he had lost like 80 pounds or something like that. But I remember in the interview, he spoke about, it sounded so eccentric at the time, but he said, you know, Charlie, I just buy the chocolate. I don't eat it. I just smell it. And I'm sitting there and I don't know why I remember that. It sounds so eccentric, but the guy is like, there's something genius about that, right? That you could buy this chocolate and while everyone else is just shoving it in their mouth and doing this guy is able to appreciate that $10 bar of chocolate just for the smell.
I know. Sometimes as a joke, I go into our local bakery in Brooklyn, wonderful bakery, and I go in and he says, "What would you like?" And I said, "I'm just here for the smell," because the smell of fresh baked bread is takes you over the top. It's just fantastic.
That I don't know why when you were speaking earlier and talking about some, you know, the percussive idea, one idea that popped into my mind, it goes back to a sort of quote that Rem Koolhaas had, I think, way back when. He came out with a book about Pearl River Delta. He was doing quite a bit of work in China at the time, I think. And someone asked him, you know, what about these ugly buildings, right? And I think he's got a couple quotes about ugly buildings. And his sort of thing was, as a collective, humanity, we still have to remember, and we have an obligation to retain some of these ugly buildings, even if we've decided that they're ugly. So I guess I wanted to use that as a question to say, could you imagine a dinner where we have some smelly stuff, or we have some things that are pungent and things that are provocative in a way that isn't necessarily just sort of, oh, you know, it's really nice, but there's something actually quite jarring.
Yes. Actually, that's interesting because we're looking at a chef who, and I don't know, remember the name of the her site, but it's like Bad Taste, I think is kind of her website. And it's like really ugly food, but apparently maybe very tasty, but it's visually like over the top, really ugly in an intentional way. So, and I know, you know, in terms of ugliness, one of my favorite inspired people who's such a great influence on me was John Cage, who said, will there ever be a time when ugly sounds will be considered beautiful sounds? Is a truck passing by a music school more musical than a truck passing by a factory? I just, you know, those people like Cage and Duchamp were such important influences on me, and Andy Warhol, who came up with these ideas for an, you know, in his book Philosophy of Andy Warhol from A to B, a restaurant called an Andy Mat, where it's a restaurant for the lonely person, and you go and you sit in your own private booth, and you don't have to be near people, or a restaurant where you go out for atmosphere and you bring your food, because you only go to a restaurant for the atmosphere, but you bring your own food to the restaurant. I think some of those are profound, but you know, you enter into thinking about them through the sense of humor. And I think that's really a powerful way of talking about profound ideas, is through humor. And I don't deny some of the humor in the work that I'm doing, and some of these dinner parties. So this, you know, Bad Taste is something that could be a really interesting idea, for, you know, Futurist dinner. I'm actually working on one right now in my studio. And I for another project, I bought a sewing machine. I learned how to sew. But it was 2 years ago. I hadn't taken out the sewing machine, and I had to relearn how to sew again in my sewing machine. But we were given by a very high-end camping goods company called Snow Peak. I don't know if you have them. It's a Japanese.
I have. No, I love Snow Peak.
They're beautiful things. So Michael, who's so amazing, he managed to get the company to give us like a carload of equipment. Now that's sitting in my studio, and I figure, what am I going to do with this? Because I want to make, we want to do a forager's picnic. And we have a mycologist who is nationally recognized mycologist, you know, mushroom collector. And John Cage was a big mushroom collector as well. So we're going to do a forager's picnic using their equipment, but I'm going to contain it on my body. So it's like encrusted, like all this equipment, like over the top backpacking, you know. So I'm learning how to sew all these pouches that will hang off my body, or someone else's, maybe someone will perform that, but I'm having fun relearning how to sew. So sometimes these little simple things can become really pleasurable once you overcome the anxiety of learning a new trade. And I think, you know, clothing was always important to me. So extensions of my body, I always thought of architecture as clothing that was distant to the body. And as you bring the wall closer and closer to the body, it starts to pixelate and it becomes fabric. So, you know, protecting the body and extending the body into space through utensils and furniture and walls and things like that. That has a lot of things that have to do with my work as well. Somehow it's just the beginning of this forager's picnic that I've been working on today.
I love it. I love it. We're doing some foraging at our plantation in the rainforest. Allan, I can't tell you how much inspiration we are getting from, you know, again, just that, it was just that one farm is table, but even through this conversation, there's so many jumping off points. And I guess the question I wanted to ask is, what do you think young people are seeing in your work that is inspiring them? You know, that's what, why is it right at this moment you've gone viral?
I think it has to do with this, with the fact, and I think this is why I teach, is you don't need to use expensive materials or complex construction devices. You can work small. You can work from a corner of your apartment and make amazingly important work. So I think the spirit of my work is that it's almost easy, you know, seemingly easy. And it's banal materials and equipment and tools, and it's digging into the earth is a very simple action. It's raising the earth into the sky as an act of like magic and religion. It's the thing that, and yet so I think part of the reason, especially with young designers, I think I think it's a kind of alchemy where you can use corrugated cardboard and make amazing things with it. You don't need titanium, metal and gold to make great transformable institutions or spaces or utensils. They can be very ordinary. So I think part of that, I think, is the simplicity of what I try to accomplish, and it has to do with sometimes a lack of skill and using what you know and your weaknesses, how your weaknesses can become your strengths. I think that's really important. The fact that, I don't draw very well. I like building. I mean, I do draw a lot, but they're very naive drawings, very primitive. And I think people look to that and said, well, you can make really good work without the technical skill that is often the case, or expensive material. So it's low budget, easy constructions, and all of that I think is appealing to younger people, maybe. At least I hope so.
And I think there's a sense of, with maybe, I mean, some of your students, right? What are they learning now? Again, we talk about this sort of primitive. Is there something in the analog world? I went to Tisch in the early 2000s, studying. I didn't graduate, but I did study at Tisch in the imaging school for with photography. My interests were more photojournalism, so I wasn't really the best fit in fine arts. So I didn't really last very long in the fine arts program, but it was a very interesting time because we were right on the cusp of this full digital transition, right? Yes. I mean, I did my training in the darkroom, very much in the analog world, knowing full well that this was almost, we had professors who were like, you're wasting your time. This is kind of, you need to get, move transition. I had other profs that were like, no, this will be its own thing, and we'll stick to that. But it was very much this transitional period. So I guess my question is, do you see some young people who are yearning for more analog, right? Who are fully ensconced in digital, who somehow feel that this is kind of their patrimony that they missed out on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more, a little bit of a return to the handmade. But I don't want to dismiss the power of computer generated programs like Rhino or SolidWorks or the things that all my students use. But we also do a lot of like really quick, I mean, during my class, very quick workshopping where they'll take corrugated cardboard and a utility knife and do transformations of cardboard until the cardboard becomes incredible, and they fall in love with the banal, ubiquitous corrugated cardboard that is all over the city of New York, and it's free, and they're making incredible things out of it. And it's like within a period of 1 hour, they're producing these amazing things, and they're saying, wow, this is an amazing material. So we do a lot of that kind of quick hands-on, and then slower. So it's like speed and slow, and then they go up and I'm working, doing Rhino presentations of installations or performance, or whatever we're doing. I have this interesting project that we're doing right now, which is our semester ends in 2 weeks after our Thanksgiving, where I have each student making 8 3-inch by 5-inch labels, and they labeling the classroom. And we're doing over and over again, 8 of them. And they're just looking at a corner of a room, or they're looking at a pinhole in the tack board, or they're looking at the relationship between the inside and the outside, and they're labeling it as if it's a piece of fine art. And then of course then it becomes a graphic design project. And why is it done in that typeface? Why isn't it done this way? What's the color card stock? Should it be a color? Should it be white? There's a huge amount of variables when you zoom in on the simplest thing, like a 3x5 label. And then you make complexity out of simplicity. And I think a lot of my work has to do with making starting with something so simple and primal, but then complexifying it. I know that's not a real word, but finding complexity in the most simple places, that kind of thing. And like last week, I gave them 15 minutes. They had to go out into the corridor space of the school at Pratt Institute, where I'm teaching. And in 15 minutes, they had to create an installation that draws attention to some insignificant detail within the school. And within 15 minutes, they came up with amazing projects. And if I gave them 16 weeks, the entire semester, to do an installation in that corridor space, it wouldn't be as good as the one they did in 15 minutes. So it's like this speed, and now they can go back and develop them further. But breaking through preconceptions, I think, has a lot to do with what we're doing in this Futurist cookbook, is how to break through preconceptions of what an ordinary dinner might be.
Absolutely. And there's one theme I can think of, that I'm going to make my own, being inspired by this, is that innovation doesn't always lead to better. That again, I think what makes food delicious oftentimes is texture. And you think about when you talked about Barth and the chopsticks, and that whole idea of, when you have the chopstick, you flake it off, you're getting a more analog experience as opposed to a digital cut, stab, slice.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So one is more quantifiable, and that's fine, but maybe the other one is in some ways more pleasurable, because you could screw it up, you could flake it the wrong way. There's something to be said about dimensionality, right? Texture. One question I wanted to ask you is, what about people who want to host some event? We're intending at the Vanilla Plantation to host some events. We're really inspired by what you're doing. What are some ways for people to incorporate some of these assumption, challenging principles into the events or gatherings that they plan?
Right. For my food space class, when I taught it last year, I did a project where I had students create fictional scenarios of 2 people who were having a picnic together. And they were fictionalized characters. So part of it is a kind of literary writing exercise, write about these 2 people. And then they have to actually construct and build a reinvented picnic basket for 2 people who are having a picnic together. So I don't know if you could send out a prompt that people come to the plantation with a scenario that they create a picnic for 2 people, or 2 people come together and they create this conceptual picnic for 2 people in the farm. I don't know if that would help you, but it's like a prompt that I've had such incredible project come out of that, reinvent a picnic basket, simple project. But as soon as you kind of talk about, how do you convey food from an interior space to an exterior space? So it's about transport, it's about portability, it's about, the content of the food itself. Another project I did related to food that might be interesting to you guys is, in the United States, it might be the same in Australia, having children do a lemonade stand. I don't know, do you do those? It's like first attempt to help kids learn what it's like to make money, so you set up a lemonade stand in front of your home in the suburbs or wherever in the country. And but I have my quote college students who were studying product design at Parsons at that time, and in teams of 2 they had to build a corrugated cardboard lemonade stand and create the recipe for the lemonade that then had to be deployed from Parsons School of Design in the Village to Washington Square Park, and then deploy them and sell lemonade. So it's like this absurdist, childlike thing. And these are, quote, sophisticated design students doing a lemonade stand. That was kind of a cool thing. I don't know, you could do a workshop.
I love that. I love that.
Like that. Now you have this plantation is a vanilla farm. Is that what?
It is, yeah. It's a vanilla farm, and we're doing papaya. We're doing a series of other organic, tropical fruits and veg. So if we'd really love to. I think I'm just so inspired by it. Your work it's reminded me that you don't have to do it all. Like we were thinking, well, what if we have people come over and they can do a yoga thing and they can do this and that. And I'm thinking, that's fine. They can do that. But I think if we just center the event, the experience around the dinner party, maybe that's all we need to do. And then we'll let people just frolic and be free.
Or you could have a long table and have, what kind of fruit? You said papaya and what else?
We have basically any type of tropical fruit. So any of the Thai fruits, mangosteen, rambutan, mangoes, we can do all of those.
Cool. So you could even have a simple, like the first step is you have a knife and a fruit. How do you cut it? What are the infinite amount of ways you can cut up a piece of fruit? Slicing, dicing, shredding. It's like I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Serra's list of verbs.
Okay.
You might look it up, but he has like 100, list of verbs. You might apply like a list of verbs for a way of treating a piece of fruit, a melon or a papaya. I don't know. That doesn't sound that interesting. I would have to brainstorm that some more. But it's like a great, idea to bring people together to kind of experiment, in the moment.
Yeah, and I think that one of the sort of like mentors to our project, he's a guy named Charles Michel.
I've met him on Zoom once.
He's someone that's kind of been like a friend to our project over the years, and he does a lot of sort of decolonizing food stuff. Yeah. And I think what's really inspiring about what you're doing is it's this idea of participation. Because so much of what we do right now, it's like the Uber Eats thing it's so transactional. And it goes against so many things that we yearn for, right? We like this idea of like, even if I just have to butter my bread, that act of just buttering the bread is now me. It's like, no one else has this buttered bread because I buttered it myself. We need some customization, some personalization. We need some participation. Yeah. We don't know, we've traded all of that for convenience. Yeah. Right? But I think that this is something like, like when you talk about dinner at, farmer's table, this idea, and you mentioned it, people dressing up, getting ready, they're prepared. But in a sense, there's a bit of participation in that, right? They're dressing up, they're coming prepared for an event. But in a sense, they're sacrificing these nice clothes to, in a sense, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah, that cashmere is not necessarily designed to be touching soil. Yes, but you're asking them to, hey, let's suspend a little bit of this. Let's ask ourselves what's really important. And if it does get a little bit of, you're going to have to take it to the dry cleaner. But what's the point of having these nice clothes if you can't be in the moment, right? If you can't share with your friends.
Yeah, I think interactivity. So rather than a chef preparing food and serving it, you are an intentional participant in the meal itself, not just eating it, but the construction of it, maybe. So it could be that the food is like a kit of parts, and it's assembled by each of the participants eating this meal together. And I think that kind of thing probably happens in some cases. I know with, like, sometimes for kids will do a pizza party and they'll have all the fixings and you make your own pizza and you can assemble it the way you want. But a kind of deconstructed and reconstructed dinner that would be done by the participants. I think that would be an interesting idea to have participation like that.
And there's glimpses of that too. I mean, if you're from South Asia and you eat with your hands, you're not just eating. It's not just, oh, I don't use a fork and knife or chopsticks. There's something. It's hard to recreate, but they're almost painting the meal, right? If you actually watch them, it'll be, no, I got 5 different. I got a chutney. I got this. I got the rice, and I'm actually making a little palette of the food.
Yeah.
Right.
That's very true. With all the condiments and things, they're actually mixing and matching and assembling.
If there's any chance for you to visit Australia, yourself and Ellen have a standing invite.
Oh, thank you. I was in Australia for, what year was it, Ellen? We were invited in the year 2000. I was a keynote speaker at the Royal Australian Institute of Architecture convention, and in Sydney, Australia. And that was great. And I was in a kind of tag team with the architects, Shigura Ban. Do you know Shigura Ban?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, so East meets West. And of course, all of the architects who were invited had huge firms, and I work alone. So it was very exciting to be part of this big operation as a quote in that field, with my little practice of being a loner, because I like collaborating when I'm teaching, but the practice of architecture was too collaborative for me. I'm a bit of a loner and I like the privacy of my studio, so I come up with these ideas. And then Michael, who's amazing because he really is promoting my work, and he's so unselfish and generous, and he is just asking me to use my work to create these events. We're doing it together, but it's quite wonderful because for the first time in my life, really, I'm out in the world activating things that were meant to be private sculptures, meant to be seen within the context of a museum or a gallery. So that light table was always meant to be a sculpture where you imagined using this table with light coming through the dinnerware. It was very sculptural. And to actually activate it and to use it, or Coffee Seeks Its Own Level, was only done to stage 4 people sitting together at a table, but it was never activated until recently, where we actually performed it. And that was so long ago that I had done that project. So the idea of interaction, I think, is becoming really exciting to me as a kind of lonely artist sitting in my studio, working, learning how to sew, woodworking. Yeah, I'm a hands-on maker. I love making and building. Now food has entered into it as a new medium for me.
It's such a powerful medium too. And, I think ancestrally food, it wasn't really ever separated from probably telling stories by the fire, entertainment.
Yeah,
right?
Right.
It was probably never narrative, and it was probably never separated from, I don't know, sort of kinship and family. And it's only a very recent thing that we've just had eaten alone. I mean, humans never ate alone.
It was always communal. Absolutely. But I was always thinking, because I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family, and the idea of the Passover Seder was one of the great performative meals where all the food was related to the story of the holiday.
Of course.
So every item of food is a prompt for telling a story, and it's totally narrative.
Of course.
That kind of thing. And so this is the idea of this picnic for 2 people where it's narrative. How do you tell a story about these two people, having a picnic together through food,
Yeah, well, exactly. But thinking about in the Orthodox household, right? There's a whole, it's almost theater about getting the chametz out of, right? You're hunting chametz. There's it could be here in this cupboard, and we go, right?
But it's such a transformative time of the year. It's a spring. It's cleansing. It's quite powerful in a way. It's for the children, and it's really amazing.
And there's the parallel to the Chinese experience too. It's like literally the same narrative feel. When you think about the Chinese New Year meal, every little element has a story. There's a thing, that you have the seaweed because it sounds like good fortune, right? You have the chicken because that sounds like good luck. You have the fish because that sounds like, storing prosperity. So
it's all narrative.
It's all narrative.
It's not just about biology, but it's about the spiritual and the physical. It's a total integration of those. It's really powerful. I did this project, which I'd love to do somehow, which is I took a ceramic coffee cup. I hope this is not off topic. A ceramic coffee cup, standard, American restaurant ware, heavy coffee cup. And I dropped it onto my floor. Here it's concrete from 1 meter off the ground. And it broke into a lot of pieces. And then each fragment I glued onto a white paper cup. And my idea was I would ship these cups around the world, and on a Zoom meeting or a Google meeting, all of us would get together and drink coffee from the same cup individually. And anyway, it's about, it's not just local, but it's also global. I mean, a lot of the farmers' table was all very locally everything was locally sourced, but here this is a global community of people coming together around the same cup of coffee. So you're drinking simultaneously through electronics, through media, through technology, and we're one community, kind of like McLuhan's idea of the global village. And the reason I dropped it from 1 meter, if you know Marcel Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages, one of my favorite pieces he ever did, he dropped 3 strings, 1 meter long, 1 meter off the ground. He dropped them and made templates out of them, and then made drawings from those 3 chance encounters of the random lines. The 3 random lines were fixed by making a template and then made drawings using those. So drop 1 meter in memory of Marcel Duchamp.
I love that. R Mutt, right? Oh, well, I remember that slide, seeing the urinal in whatever art history class, and I remember it was R. Mutt, right? Was the
exactly.
I don't know why I remember that, but
or there's a fur-lined teacup, which is Merit Oppenheim, where she, she took a fur coat and she cut it and glued it into the inside of a coffee cup or a teacup called fur-lined. Very important. Every history of art class will open with Merit Oppenheim's fur-lined teacup. So Michael and I were recently asked to do futurist holiday dinner ideas for some magazine or a blog or something like that. One of which I came up with was take the Christmas stockings from last year and using polyester resin, coat them in polyester resin so they don't leak, and drink hot chocolate from last year's stockings. I don't know if you have that tradition in Australia of hanging stockings during Christmas season, or 8 Christmas trees, 1 lit each night of Hanukkah. So conflating the 2 holidays together. And then one of my favorites is for the Thanksgiving dinner. We have turkey and American Thanksgiving. Place a cams and servos in the turkey so that the wings and the legs move while you're eating dinner.
We need a little bit of absurdism, right? And again, the futurists, I guess, right? Some of this, you don't really know what they took seriously, because like even in that book, they've got the fasces, which is, that was the basis for fascism, right? Is the fasces, the bundle of sticks,
reeds.
right?
Yeah.
It's in the American Eagle, right? He's got the olive branch and the bundle of spears, right? It's actually a fasces. That's in the book, right? And they're talking about that. So it's playful in a way. Are they serious? Are they not? I guess there's a real power to humor. There's a power to this absurd, some dose of absurdism.
Yeah. And I think especially in the United States with our government at this point, we need humor in our lives because it's pretty gruesome here in this country politically.
This is why this dinner party, you've inspired me so much about this dinner party and thinking about really maybe that's what we should be. Like when we get people together, it shouldn't be diffuse over stuff like this. Maybe what I need to do is emphasize more about the dinner party. Part of the dinner party, at least, my parents threw great dinner parties when I was growing up. One of my favorite books growing up was Dali's cookbook, which Taschen did a re-edition of. And again, it was totally improbable, but my parents put that out there as like a coffee table book and things like that. I would go and sneak peeks at this absurdist, surrealist cookbook.
Beautiful.
I think it was published in '83 or something like that. But he had it was just like mountains of foie gras and then wine and it was so sumptuous. So it was absurd. And over the top, orgiastic, let's be real.
Exactly.
Very, some of it was confronting and you could see how it's just taken way too much time for an average home cook to do. There was something very regal and almost kind of hierarchical, Louis XIV about it. Yeah, elitist. But as a kid, I was mesmerized by this book, and I guess if anything, maybe the takeaway is a little bit of humor, that maybe it was partially tongue in cheek. What I wanted to riff on too was that you talk about the politics, you talk about this, it's that no one really dines together, right? That in a sense, we've lost this ability to sit down and like we're at this point where people of political houses, of political views, gather amongst themselves, and no one actually crosses the aisle. No one dines together.
I know, right? And if we go to a restaurant, and the young couple sitting next to us, they're each on their phones. That's from each other. I mean, I don't think they're FaceTiming each other. Put your phone away. Maybe I'm old time, but.
Not at all. I don't think so at all. I think that there's some ability that we've lost it, and I think this is why the virality right at this moment, that dinner party, it's the idea of the surprise of going and not knowing who you're going to be seated next to. If you have a half decent host, they've put some thought into how to arrange. There's some it's incumbent upon the guest to also bring some, like you said, you dress to a certain level, like everything, we're always wearing casual clothes, but a proper dinner party, there should be a dress code, right? It doesn't mean that it has to be black tie, but it means that you should put a little bit of second thought, into it.
I think so. I like that. I'm going to do that from now on. Instead of wearing blue jeans, I'm going to wear a suit.
Yeah, and I think that you should be ready to temper some of your views, right? Or at least be ready to have them challenged, right? It's not really a dinner party if it is a confirmation fest about how we are so great, right? If it's all people of one viewpoint, that's like a rally. That's a different type of event. That's not a dinner party. A dinner party presumes that you have there's some idea of the big tent, right? That some people are coming together who may not have necessarily grouped together in such a fashion, in such a configuration in the real world.
Yes, I agree.
Anyhow, sir, I will, if I do something like Farmer's Table on my plantation, I hope you will take that as a form of flattery, as a form of, if I copy that, we do have 3 or 4 of the most venomous snakes in the world. So I don't know how, we might need a snake catcher standing nearby. There's a chance. There's a chance. But if we do something like Farmer's Table, I hope you would see that as a form of, well, imitation is a form of flattery.
Thanks. We actually got a call from a winery in Belgium who wants to do Farmer's Table. I'm thinking of proposing that one form of Farmer's Table could be that underground is cast concrete to create the wall and the bench and the ground with proper drainage that would be permanent, and the ground would be the actual ground. So you're actually sitting on a more permanent surface, but you're still sitting embedded in the ground with ramps that come down. So it'd be very sculptural in the landscape. So I'm going to see if we can propose that for this. We'll see what this is. I have no idea what's. But
I'm gonna noodle a few things, and I hope we can continue the conversation. Because
yes, I hope so. It'd be great to keep in touch. I would love to see what you're up to at the plantation. And your background is it seems like you're very knowledgeable in the fine arts.
Oh no. My background is, again, I have a Hong Kong parent and I have a U.S. parent, a Californian parent, and I grew up, I'd say, mostly in Hong Kong, but I've spent a lot of time in the U.S. and I did go to art school at Tisch. I didn't graduate, but again, I've always been interested in it. I ended up working in real estate development, but again, I don't know. I've always been more interested in the architecture and the sort of not so commercial sides of development. Planning. I've always been interested in planning.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you, sir. I really am serious about potentially doing something like Farmer's Table on our property. So if
keep us in the loop, so we get some credit for that, it would be nice.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
And also, it would help to promote this book, in terms of maybe doing a launch there or something like that when it comes out.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So if I have my site and I have this sort of concept, because we actually have a food forest. So we've got a food forest with about 300 species of tropical fruits and things like that. So we were thinking of potentially something like Farmer's Table in the 50-yard line centerpiece of the food forest. And maybe, when you mentioned something semi-permanent, that really
Well, let's talk about that. That'd be interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And it could actually be longer than 30 feet. I think I have the drawings here. I think it was 30 feet long.
So let me put a little package together, just some images and things like that, and then we can chat.
Yeah, and have another conversation with Michael.
I'd love to. I really would. It was such a pleasure, sir.
Yeah, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Really nice.
All right. Take care.